We continue a playlist series that we started today, and as we reflect on the lyrics of that song, the part that stands out to me, two things. No good God would cause a thing so ugly. It leaves you cursing while you're trying to pray. This time I think they're one and the same. This week has been filled with grief, sadness, and anger. And as distant as Texas is from us here, it feels incredibly close. We often respond to things like what we heard about and saw this week with the phrase, I cannot imagine, right? I cannot imagine what the families are going through. Things like that. But my imagination started with Columbine when I was a teenager. And I saw footage of kids my age running in terror from their school. Unfortunately, I have imagined. Whether it's my anxiety at work or just the realities of our circumstance, I have imagined. I have considered the worst. I certainly have no way of knowing or coming close to knowing the grief or anguish that parents in Uvalde are feeling. But this sequel has repeated enough for me to imagine the worst. For myself, for my kids. And it haunts me. And maybe it haunts you too. And at this point, I think it should. Because this reality we're living in is not normal and not okay. And let me just say this before I get started here. I hate preaching angry. Like, I really do. But I feel like I long for the days when I could just stand up here and give like an encouraging message and just hurrah, and we all go out and have a great Sunday feeling uplifted from this moment. And maybe that's what you need, and I'm sorry if you came here for that. But it just seems like it's this revolving door of grief that we've been going through as a culture and as a country and as a people and as a church. Honestly, just the last 10 days of the church. Most of you don't know this because maybe you're not up on like what's happening in the church, but like remove everything that happened in Uvalde and you still have a cataclysmic thing that has happened in the last week in the church, which is that the Southern Baptist Convention listed 700, and that's just the ones they know of right now, pastors who have been sexually abusing people and who have been hidden by the leaders within the church. Just so you know, my first church that I took a job at, that I was paid at, was a Southern Baptist Convention church I was the youth pastor at. These are people I've sat around tables with. Like, these are people I've had interactions with. I went to an SBC school. I have 2 degrees from an SBC school. I know multiple pastors in SBC contexts. The SBC is the largest Protestant denomination in America. And they love to rail on the Catholics when that whole thing came out. While they were doing it themselves. I long for the days when I could get up here and just give an encouraging message, but the state of things. So if I come across cynical or angry today, I just want you to know I am. I'm not even going to hide it. I'm not even going to act like I'm filled with hope and I'm just going to bring that to you today. Like, I hope that you maybe are in a better state than I'm in, and maybe you should have preached today. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I love you.
But
it's okay.
I also want to make it clear, like, I don't believe I'm the mouthpiece for God. So if that's what you come to hear sermons for, the mouthpiece of God, like, I don't think my words are somehow sanctified because I went to school and got ordained. I think God can use my words, sure, but God can also use a sunset or a song or a painting or a friendship. So I want to place it in its context. Nothing I'm saying up here is infallible. Nothing I'm saying up here is just straight up true because I said it. I'm not speaking for God in my sermons. I'm doing the best I can to interpret the life and teachings of Jesus, the Bible, our world, the context of our current lived experience, then considering, obviously, my own reality, my own emotion, my own feelings, and hoping that maybe this would lead to growth, change, love, confession, forgiveness, and more in our community and beyond. So these are my words alone. But like, what is happening? Like, right? Like, have you just asked yourself that question this week? Like, this is really a question, right? Like, what is happening? Like yesterday, I just had to try to escape because this week has been so heavy, and I've neglected my kids this week because I've been so deeply just grieving. Like, and I was like, we are just going to have a day where we hang out and we go do stuff, and we are going to be like, we're going to go watch a movie. You can have as much popcorn and candy as you want at the movie. I don't care. Dad's credit card is swiping today. Like, we're just going to go out and do stuff because like we have to be together, and we have to just try to rise above this for at least a day. And so we went and we watched the new Doctor Strange movie this weekend. And after that movie, I said, this is what I feel like. I feel like I'm in an alternate universe. Like, I feel like something happened and I'm in an alternate universe. This can't be reality. I've lost so much faith in American Christians. Like, I can't even express it. Any goodwill they had built up with me through my youth, of which I was raised in their churches, and in my adulthood, of which I was raised in their schools, it's just all been lost. Like, I now see Christians as just people to be skeptical of. And I'm a freaking pastor. Like, it's comical, but it's also like this feeling within me that is like, I don't know what universe I live in anymore. I really don't. It's truly disorienting. Like, it's the most disorienting thing I've dealt with in my life. I'm so tired of seeing Christians more in love with weapons of war than Jesus. Christians more in love with protecting those weapons than children. Now, let me be crystal clear on a couple of things here. I grew up around guns. I've shot guns. I grew up like in hunting culture in Indiana. Like, a lot of people I knew had guns. I would consider many of the people I know who have guns, who I grew up with, responsible gun owners. I know there's a deeper conversation that needs to be had in our society about what guns are acceptable and aren't. I get that. Like, and some people would just say the blanket statement, they all need to be in. Okay, like, that's a conversation for our society to have. I get it. I fully understand that some within culture deeply support guns and even unabated access to all weapons. While I don't agree, people can certainly have those views in a free society. We live in a free country, and if your view of the Second Amendment is that it means you can have a tank or a drone that can drop a bomb, awesome, good for you. Where I lose my mind, and I mean lose my mind because I feel like I'm in an alternate universe, is when Christians are the biggest supporters of these weapons of war and continued access to them. It literally makes no sense to me. And forgive me if that's your view about weapons and you also consider yourself a Christian, but it defies any logical reading of Jesus in the New Testament. It just defies it. Like, there's no, I personally can't make it compute. So I just want to remind everyone today, Jesus called his followers to peace and nonviolence. Not implicitly, but explicitly called them to that. It is silly to even need to say that. Like, that is Christianity 101. That is something that people who don't follow Jesus know about Jesus. Like, because it just couldn't be more obvious. So I felt we needed to take a look at Jesus today. We are a Jesus-centered community. That's what we say we are. So we probably should consider what Jesus has to say about things. That's in our statement. That's who we are. So let's see what Jesus says about it. Here's what Jesus said in his first ever sermon he gave. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." I think that second part we don't focus on a whole lot. They will be called children of God. That there is a sonship and a daughtership that comes with being a peacemaker. Not a peacekeeper, a peacemaker. There's this story where this woman is about to be stoned. And they bring her to Jesus and they say, "Hey, should we stone her?" This is actually how it goes. It goes, "Teacher, they said to Jesus, "This woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" Because, the law of Moses is the highest law. We don't know anything about the highest law in our land having a grip on our imagination. They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." And after this, they all walked away. He disarmed an entire group of people. Jesus did. Jesus, the one who said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," also disarmed an entire group of people with the weapon of choice from the Old Testament for what you would do to somebody in this situation. Some of us forget about the story of Paul, but Paul was a terrorist to the church. Shockingly enough, no one killed him. I think if Paul were to come today, he wouldn't write half the New Testament because he wouldn't have been alive to write half the New Testament. In fact, they participated with God in his redemption. And they saw his impact. Half the New Testament, again, written by Paul. The same person, Paul, who was the leader at the stoning of Stephen, later committed to nonviolence because he saw this as central to following the Jesus way. Here's what he says in his writings in Romans. "Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Overcome evil with good. Good. Some would say, we just need more good guys with weapons. Then we will overcome evil with good. But this isn't the way of Jesus. Or we have to say we don't think Peter was a good guy. Because there's this moment where Jesus is about to be arrested. And Peter, a good guy with a sword, attempts to kill a guard who's about to shackle Jesus. And instead, he hits his ear because he's terrible at aim, apparently. Jesus is in the midst of being wrongfully arrested. And what does he do? He heals the soldier. He heals him. Then he looks at Peter and he says these words, "Put your sword back in its place. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword." All who draw the sword will die by the sword. He's talking about the myth of redemptive violence. That when we seek to redeem things in this world through violence, the violence only comes back. Like this violent back and forth only leads to more violence. It does not end violence. Jesus was nonviolent. It's amazing that I would have to argue with Christians today to convince them of that. Because the New Testament is clear. We have no record of Jesus supporting violence. Now, when I say that, some immediately go to, well, he turned over tables, Justin, and he made a whip. So let's talk about that real quick. A word about this. If we were dealing with an epidemic of table flipping, then I would say, let's let that go. Right? If that's what we were dealing with, I would say, well, yeah, let's let tables be flipped. No one in that account is marked as injured or killed by his table flipping or by his whip making, which he does make a whip. He actually took time to braid it too. It's a very interesting passage. I mean, I actually think it's like almost WWE Jesus, and not that I don't like to paint Jesus as violent, but I think paint him as showy, like the showy kind of like, hey guys, because he starts braiding the whip in front of them, which is like, this is coming. It's going to happen. I'm had it with this. But let's talk about what's actually happening here, because we don't often do that. The temple is this place where during one time of the year, the Passover, everyone would come and they would have to make a sacrifice. And for them, in that culture, that sacrifice was the one thing that connected them to God throughout the year. And to not make that sacrifice would be like, it would be like being distant from God for the remainder of the year. Or just this, it was so connected to who they were. So what would happen sometimes, and in this case was happening, is that people would bring animals into the temple that would be prepared and ready for sacrifice, and they would mark them up. It's like Woodstock with bottled water, okay? It's like they are marking up the sacrifices. And Jesus is watching this, and he's watching poor people come to the temple with a desire to have access to God, being denied because they don't have the financial means. And so he goes in, and all the birds on the table, he flips the table, and the cages break open, and they start flying. And all the sheep and other animals, he starts cracking a whip, and they start running. He causes chaos. But I don't believe he causes violence. These are two different things. Again, no one is injured. These animals scatter. In essence, the people profiting are seeing their money fly away, and they're also seeing all of their profits as Jesus cracks a whip run in different directions. To argue this is a case for violence ignores the reality of what's actually happening in the story. Jesus is incredibly bold here. I'm not saying this is probably one of the things that got him killed. So let's talk about how, this is a big deal. I'm not saying it's not a big deal. It really threatened Rome and the whole system that was happening, the power of the temple leaders, because they were getting a cut of that money. This threatened everything. Jesus knew what he was doing. He was putting his own life at risk by doing that. But to say it was violence, I just don't see it that way, and I don't think it can be tweaked into that way. But let's talk about this. Let's say you actually believe that was violence, or that you believe in some way you interpret Jesus as violence. I can prove Jesus was committed to nonviolence without using the Bible, without using the New Testament, without using the words of Jesus, and just by using the reality of the early church. Okay? The early church, we have no record of them arguing for violence. We actually have record of them saying nonviolence is the only way to follow Jesus. Let's just read. I just pulled a few historic quotes. Okay, these are early Christians before the Christian church is no longer outlawed in Rome, which is before Constantine. Okay, these accounts. There is the Lord in disarming Peter disarmed every soldier. Tertullian. Okay, go to the next slide. Christians could never slay their enemies, for the more that kings, rulers, and peoples have persecuted them everywhere, the more Christians have increased in number and grown in strength. This is Origen. Wherever arms have glittered, they must be banished and exterminated from thence. As simple and quiet sisters, peace and love require no arms, for it is not in war, but in peace that we are trained. Clement of Alexandria. You can continue. Next slide. Above all, Christians are not allowed to correct with violence. Also Clement of Alexandria. I do not wish to be a king. I am not anxious to be rich. I decline military command. Die to the world. Repudiate the madness that is in it. We who formerly used to murder one another now refrain from even making war upon our enemies. Justin Martyr. Interesting last name. Whatever Christians would not wish others to do to them, they do not to others. And they comfort their oppressors and make them their friends. They do good to their enemies. Through love towards their oppressors, they persuade them to become Christians. A soldier of the civil authority must be taught not to kill men, and to refuse to do so if he is commanded, and to refuse to take an oath. If he is unwilling to comply, he must be rejected for baptism.
Can you say that name?
I'm not going to try to say that name. Hippopotamus. No. It's Hippotius, I think. Way to bring some levity into this. There is nothing better than peace, in which all warfare of things in heaven and things on earth is abolished. Ignatius. I could keep going. There's so many more that I left out. I literally might actually post them to our group, to our Facebook group, just because the early church was united on the front of peace and nonviolence. They did not respond to their world in violence. They could have. There were plenty groups smaller than them that were responding with violence. You had the daggermen at the time of Jesus that would go in and kill a Roman soldier and then get out. They were assassins, right? And when Jesus is actually potentially going to be released, it's between him and one of these daggermen. Who's going to be released? Jesus hasn't done anything. The daggerman actually killed a Roman soldier and they let him go instead. But this isn't even the most convincing. A bunch of quotes taken from the first century. Okay, first, second century, who cares? Maybe this is what we should consider. There were 12 disciples. These are the 12 people closest to Jesus. If anyone knows Jesus' mission, it's these 12 people. One of them betrays Jesus and then commits suicide. And then there are 11 left. What of the 11? Well, 10 were martyred for their faith. They did not fight back. They didn't retaliate. They didn't argue they should. John would have been murdered too, but it was easier for them to send him to a work camp on an island and for him to write a crazy book that we still have today, right? And so, they lived in an immense time of violence. If there was anyone who ever had a reason to respond with violence under the persecution and occupation of Rome, you and I would have every reason to say this is wrong and violence is the only answer. But they didn't, because they believed Jesus was calling them to something higher, that their lives even were worth that sacrifice. Now, obviously, somewhere along the way, the church has lost their way, right? Obviously, when Rome makes Christianity the state religion, we can talk about all the church history. Like, if you want to geek out about that, we can talk about all the ways in which that happened and that really transformed the church. But as we consider today, this quote from Frederick Douglass is something I've spent a lot of time this week reflecting on. He says this: "Between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference." The widest possible difference. Is this true? I mean, overwhelmingly it has felt this way for me, and it seems like the widening is getting just more and more and more. I sometimes wonder myself if I'm even a Christian anymore. Like, I wonder if I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just wrong in the way I read the Bible. Maybe I have come to understand it wrong, because you feel so gaslit when you see the large majority of Christians unimaginatively arguing for more violence. Like, especially as I hear Christians say things like, the real problem is we took God out of the schools. We need God in schools. We don't want stuff like this to happen. We need God in schools. And I sigh because I hesitate to even bring that here, because can I just be honest really quick before I go on to this point? The line between politics and the pulpit have just so blurred, because people are making statements about God as politicians. So I have this tough time of, like, I used to, when I was younger especially, I used to feel this like deep need to have this thick line between what I could say about the world and what I would say in the pulpit, and to try not to really touch anyone's, favorite candidate. And I'm just gonna be honest, on both sides, they're both using God in a way that is so abhorrent at times that drives me nuts. And I'm like, this has to be talked about in the church, because we can't do this. This is idolatry, to prop up like this God that is on our side with our policy, when usually those policies on both sides are not actually bettering the oppressed. They're not actually helping those that Jesus is deeply concerned with helping. To say we need to get God in schools, like, how about we put Jesus in our churches? Like, how about that? How about that? We need the teachings of Jesus to be elevated in Christians before we consider what they need to say to culture. Like, I just don't... I also want to say this because it's really bothered me this week. And it's the same things. Whenever a shooting happens, it's always the same things. It's the same, we need God in schools, the same, all the other things that get said afterwards that remind me that since Columbine, really very little has changed. Like, in my lifetime, the majority of my lifetime, very little has changed. When people, politicians especially, say it is a mental health problem we need to fix, it's not a gun problem. I just want to say this really quick. Sure. Yes, of course we have a mental health problem in this country. Are you kidding me? Yes. So do something.
Amen.
Pass a freaking bill. Approve funding. Have you tried to get a therapist? Have you? Have you? You should just try. Not even because you need it maybe, but just try. Go call your health care. See what it's like. See how long it takes you to get a therapist. Do you know one of the biggest questions I get as a pastor? I need therapy. What should I do? Do you know what I say? Good freaking luck. Because it's going to depend on your particular healthcare. And then even then, good luck. You're probably going to have to pay. I'm in therapy now. I'm on one of the most accessible platforms in America for therapy. I pay over a car payment a month for that. It is not accessible. Most healthcare does not cover it. It might cover a minuscule amount, but you have to commit to being on that. And this is even based on the assumption that people who have mental health issues can diagnose themselves. If you fall when you leave this room and break your arm, you know you need help. If you have a mental health condition, you might not even know you need help. We have a mental health problem. Duh. Like, of course we do. The same politicians that are telling you that right now, go check their voting record. And I mean on both sides. Because they probably voted against funding, or they defunded programs that were actually working on this. Multiple politicians who have made statements this week about mental health have defunded programs that were set up to help people get access to mental health, or voted against bills that were going to expand options for mental health. Don't say that. Don't say this is a mental health problem if you're not committed to fixing that problem. If you're doing everything you can to vote against it. It drives me so nuts because at the same time, these people are claiming this like spiritualization of this. That like, if America could just get back to God, then we would be fixed. And you're just like, it's so painful to watch. I want you to just understand in my lifetime the reality of this situation. I do think mental health needs to be considered. I do think there are a lot of things as a culture we need to do better. I also think guns are a problem.
Yeah.
I want you to see this graph right here. So you can see Columbine here, right? Like you can see all the different locations of shootings. Did you know we had an assault weapons ban in America?
Yes.
We did in my lifetime.
Yes.
Okay, I was a teenager and they were banned. I was in high school when the ban expired. Look at the graph after the ban expired. Are we to believe mental health just went crazy in the early 2000s? That's what did it. Now, I'm not going to lie. Social media has certainly contributed to mental health issues. So I'm not saying part of this might not be impacted by that. I want to acknowledge the realities of data. But this tells me, along with many other countries that have banned assault weapons, right? That assault weapons that are designed to kill people quickly, being regulated differently than they are right now. These dots over here are unacceptable, okay? But look at that. Like, there's a solution. Like, and if we get it wrong, if we do it, and then we're wrong, that wasn't the solution, what? Wouldn't it at least be worth trying? Like, what we are processing this week as we hear details of Uvalde is just, it is so hard. It is so hard to consider. I have a 10-year-old son. The majority of the kids killed were 10 years old. It is heartbreaking. And we can do something. I want to show you this picture of this old dude. His name's Charles Finney. He's the inventor of the altar call. Now, many of you have a hate relationship with the altar call, okay? You're like, the altar call? Why are we showing him right now? Well, the inventor of the altar call probably would have had a hate relationship with the altar call too. He's one of the early evangelists in America. Like I said, we owe the altar call to him. I don't think we owe how it's been in a lot of ways corrupted. But as he preached and shared and told people to come to faith in Jesus, he said, you must come to the altar and put down your papers for the slaves that you own in order to follow Jesus. If you don't do that, you cannot follow Jesus. He was an abolitionist. This is the kind of radical call we need. We need Charles Finney. We need a new Charles Finney. The church needs to be we need so many Charles Finneys. I still believe love wins. I want to hold on to that hope, but I also believe action and challenge right now has to be what we do. This can't be something we continue to accept. We have to do better. Now, we are a church, and prayer is important. And we're going to pray today. But prayer without action, in my opinion, is unfaithful. So before we pray, I want to have my friend Rachel come up, and I'm going to just ask her some questions about some ways that we can be acting right now. Rachel and I have organized together around a lot of things. You come on up. And she's far more educated in this than I am. And so I'm going to let her either share or we can talk. What do you want to do? You just want to share? Okay, both. Perfect. All right. I'll give you the mic and you can introduce yourself.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
And hi, guys. So I, as Justin has mentioned, have been very just devastated by gun violence for a long time. I remember when Columbine happened, I was 9, so a lot younger than you. But and I remember I remember my parents bought me the book Rachel's Tears because she was one of the students killed who said, it was, I don't remember it very well. I haven't read it in a long time, but I remember it was kind of painting a picture of Rachel died for her faith and my name's Rachel. And so my parents bought it for me, and it was weird to think about all the things that have happened since then. When I remember when I was 9, this is a once in a lifetime tragedy. This is never going to happen again. But seeing Sandy Hook happen and so many other shootings since then, for me to kind of wrap my head around this, data and stats help me. And so here's some for 2022. So a mass shooting is classified as more than 4 people killed in one incident. So this year alone, there's been 213 mass shootings, 27 school shootings. In 2019, there was 417 total, and that's gone up with the pandemic. So in 2020, there were 611. Last year, there were 693. A lot of those happened during the summer, and so I expect that number is going to be even greater this year. And so when my family and I moved here 3 years ago from Washington State, and that's where I grew up, in a state that's always had decent laws, and I never really thought about gun violence living in a blue state. And so coming here, I started doing some research on what it's like in Pennsylvania. We're 15th in the nation for our gun laws, so not terrible, but not great. And I found out about, does anyone know about Everytown for Gun Safety or Moms Demand Action? Yeah, okay. So I have followed them over the years, especially after Vegas. And I started looking, like, where is there a Moms Demand, like, action, like, chapter I can, like, become involved in. And so Moms Demand Action was started the day after Sandy Hook by a mom of 5 who believed strongly that we should and can do more to end gun violence. And so that Facebook group now is blossomed into 8 million supporters and volunteers that are in every state trying to champion to end gun violence. And so the last couple of years, I've been doing some research. I also decided to start our own chapter in Hershey. Hasn't been very active during the pandemic just because everything was virtual, and also I started a school program last fall. But there are ways to get involved, and I want to share some of those with you. And so just a little brief kind of picture, because I didn't know what gun laws were in Pennsylvania, and I'm sure that some of you don't either. And so there are 5 foundational gun laws for every state. Pennsylvania has 2 of them. The first one is a background check or purchase permit at every gun sale. And so that we do have that for handguns, but not for assault rifles or long guns. So you can go to a licensed gun dealer and buy an AR-15 with no background check in Pennsylvania. You can also open carry that weapon. And so if I saw in my town of Hummelstown a guy with an AR-15 or woman walking down the street, and I called the police and said, hey, this person has an assault weapon, like, that's concerning. They said, oh, that's completely illegal. And so it doesn't matter if that person commits a violent act or not, it's legal to do so. And so there was nothing I could do to stop them or have the police get involved to stop them if they did do something. And so that said, there's no restrictions or large capacity magazine bans. Even
There's
if
no large capacity.
No. Nope. So, and we do, the second law is a concealed carry permit. And so you are required to carry a concealed, or to carry a permit if you carry a concealed firearm in public. However, you don't need any training to do so. There's no extreme risk law, so that allows law enforcement and often family members to petition for a court order to temporarily prevent someone in crisis from accessing guns. And so we talk about mental health and that it's a mental health problem. Well, like Justin said, often people that have mental health issues don't know that they are struggling. I'm a mom that had postpartum depression and anxiety, and I didn't know I had it for a long time. And there's a really staggering rate of moms that commit suicide from postpartum depression and didn't know they needed help. So if this law was passed, we could be able to advocate for those people that we see that need help and be able to let law enforcement know, or statewide, that this person should not be able to purchase a gun. Thankfully, as of right now, there's no stand your ground law like in Florida where you are justified to protect yourself if you are threatened with a gun, and there's no repercussions for that. Quickly, the last one is there's no secure storage required if you own a gun, which to me as a mom, I've never had to think about, if my kids go to a play date, are they going to find a gun there? And is it going to be the last time I see them because they were playing and found a gun? And so, and with this lack of law, if that happened to me or another family, and it happens all the time here in Pennsylvania, unintentional shootings of children. If my child died because of an unsecured firearm in a friend's home, there's nothing that I could do legally to make up for that loss of my child. And I don't think, I don't want to say like, oh, I'm a vengeful person and then like want to punish that family, but like, why, like that system doesn't make sense. Like, why, like, if it's not like asking like, oh, like you can't, like we're going to try to take away your weapons. It's like, let's model responsible behavior. Like if you have a weapon, like let's store it safely. I know there's a lot of kind of flack given of like, well, if I secure my weapons and store them, like I won't be able to access them. And there's a lot of gun locks and safes that you can literally put your fingerprint to open them within seconds and access them. Same thing for storing your ammunition separately. And so with secure storage, that's one thing that I've been able to learn more about. That's something proactive that we can do. And it can be just a simple conversation of if you're going to go over, if parents in the room, having your children go over for a play date with someone new, saying, hey, I just wanted to check in and see if you have any guns stored in the home, like, I just want to make sure they're like stored safely and not making it like a shameful or judgmental thing. And then like saying, also, can I bring a snack? Like it can be like a very casual conversation because too many kids find guns under the bed in a drawer, loaded, and not secured at all. And so that's one thing that Moms Demand Action does. It's called their Be Smart program, which SMART is an acronym that stands for secure all guns in your home. M is model responsible behavior around guns. A is ask about the presence of guns in other homes. R is recognize the role of guns in suicide. And I left out T, and I don't know what it is at this moment. So there are things that we can do to talk, just have a conversation. I know moms that I've talked about this before, like, I didn't even think to ask that. Like, that's a really good point. And I think it's a sad reality that we have to even talk about this. But statistics aren't going to go down if we don't have the conversation. So I am the local group lead for Hershey, like Moms Demand Action chapter. So I do have a Facebook group that we can put on your guys' Facebook if you guys want to request to join. You just have to like answer some questions, and I'll admit you. There are a couple of things that you can do. You can tell our senators to take action on gun safety. That's by texting BOLD to 64433. You can also, if you
post all this,
yeah.
She'll make a post in our Facebook group. If you're not in the Facebook group, yeah, so you can keep going. I'm just
Okay.
saying, if they're like frantically trying to write anything down.
Yeah, we'll have all this available. There's also, we are planning to do a event next weekend in Hershey. So June 3rd is National Gun Violence Awareness Day, and so Moms Demand Action, and every town does Wear Orange, like a weekend or whenever those dates tend to line up every June, to be able to provide information, education, and also solidarity for gun violence survivors. And so we will be having a table set up either at the Market on Chocolate or somewhere in that vicinity, and we'll have a bunch of swag. We can, talk and like do anything that is needed to be able to share resources. Also, June 11th is the March for Our Lives is happening again in DC. It was started by the activists from Parkland. And so they did it in 2018, and they're doing it again. I'm hopeful that I'll be going with a couple of friends to that. So those are two events that if you want to plug in, like those are available. And when Justin was talking about mental health, I just want to share some statistics about suicide because it's the largest, or 6 out of 10 gun deaths are suicides. And so when I hear certain legislators or various people say it's a mental health problem, it's like, well, if you acknowledge that and there's easy access to guns, like how can you not distinguish the problem there? And I think when mass shootings like this happen, it's easy to think, oh, these are the only shootings that are going on, or like, but the reality is 110 people are killed by a firearm every day. And so it's more than 40,000 a year. And I think it's like Justin has said, like it feels paralyzing and hopeless when we see something like this happen to children, to not know what we can do, and to lose faith in our elected officials that they haven't done anything, well, they're not going to do anything now. But I just want to tell you that there is, I feel like if we stop clinging on to hope and just don't keep going, like what is going to, how does that serve us? And so with Moms Demand Action, why I've loved being part of it is they provide a space to cling together when it is heart-wrenching and it sucks and we feel like we just want to give up. And it also inspires us to be able to keep pushing forward. And so I wasn't going to share this, but my brother killed himself less than 2 weeks ago with a firearm. And so we got back from his funeral, and that's like the second we found out about Robb Elementary. And I didn't think that I would be capable of wanting to keep going. And honestly, I'm grateful because my grief is giving me a path to be able to encourage other people, because even though it was enough for me to fight for gun violence prevention for the sake of others, now it's very personal to me. And I don't intend on letting lawmakers or anybody tell me that it's not. And if I can help you join and do the same, I'm so happy to do that.
Woo! Thank you, Rachel.
This is going to require a lot of strength, right? To commit to this, even keeping it in our front of our mind, right? Instead of saying a prayer today, because a lot of times I think that's what we do, we bow our heads and we say a prayer. We're going to stand and we're going to sing a prayer. This is the Lord's Prayer, and the refrain of "Your love is strong," that God's love is strong. And when you say that, I want you to think about this, that God's love is stronger than however strong you feel this is. Like, however strong you feel the grip might be on our country, right? However strong you feel the grief you're holding is, God's love is stronger. So may we sing that and believe that today.